Well, hello darlings, and welcome to today's video. Today we are going to be doing another poetry book review, and today's review is on No Matter the Wreckage by Sarah Kay. If you're new here, I routinely review poetry books that I'm reading in my poetry book club, and yes, that is what it's called. And basically, me and my poetry friends, we get together, we read poetry books, we discuss them, we create prompts based off of the poems that we like, and then we write our own poems inspired by the prompts. And that is how the poetry book club goes. And most recently we read No Matter the Wreckage by Sarah Kay. Now, Sarah Kay is a poet from New York. Her filmed performances have garnered well over 12 million views online. And as a widely sought after touring poet, she has been invited to share her work on such diverse stages as the 2011 TED Conference in Long Beach, California, and so on and so forth. A passionate educator, Sarah Kay performs and teaches poetry in classrooms and communities around the world. So that is her little bio on the back of the book. Now, No Matter the Wreckage is an interesting poetry book. I would argue that some of the pieces in the book don't feel a lot like poetry. They feel like short essays, even snapshots of a memoir. And in the book club, we discussed that we felt like this could have been two different books. And I agree with that assessment, because not all of the pieces go very well together. Now, that's not to say that the pieces aren't written well. I do believe that all of the pieces in here are very well written. They just don't all go together. And Sarah Kay is a spoken word artist. And so I don't know if I can say most, but a lot of these poems were meant to be performed live. And if you watch her live performances versus reading it, it just hits differently. Some of these pieces just don't read well, but they perform well. And so that was kind of an interesting experience as well, to read something and be like, I'm not really connecting with this, but then to see her perform it and have a different experience. But I think that is something that could happen very easily with spoken word artists. The last spoken word artist I read, Megan Foley. None of her pieces really hit me like that, but I could see how it could be something that could easily happen. For me, this book just isn't really for me, you know? Like I said, there's nothing wrong with it. It just didn't really speak to me as a person. And I think poetry is like that. It's very individual. You're either going to really love it or you're not. And I mean, you can feel lukewarm and everything. And I do kind of feel lukewarm. But, you know, the ones that you really love are the ones that really speak to you. And I think some of that might be because Sarah Kay is a city girl, and I've grown up in the country my whole life. I've always lived near lakes and parks and woods, so I'm very nature oriented. And so there were quite a few pieces about the city and kind of romanticizing the city, and they were really well written and even beautiful to read, but I just didn't relate to it, you know? I read it and I was like, I don't really feel this. And for me, the poetry I love the most is the poetry that makes me feel something. Now, that's not to say there are not poems in here that I love. There are poems in here that I love. There are prose pieces in here that like I said before, I feel like would belong more in a memoir, that are very compelling to read and beautiful. And there are a few pieces that I just didn't like, and a few pieces that just didn't read well to me, but are performed well. And so I'm going to go through and highlight a few poems, and then I will read the poem I wrote that is inspired by one of the prompts that I wrote for the book. So let's get into it. I will start with what I think is my least favorite poem in the entire book, which is called Jellyfish. Now, Jellyfish is written very well. It's wonderful storytelling. It's one of those pieces that I mentioned feels more like it could belong in a memoir. But the reason that I do not like this poem is more personal. If you watched my second video, which is an AuthorTube tag video, you'll know that I am a vegetarian and I absolutely love animals. And the Jellyfish poem, or prose, talks about how she killed jellyfish as a child. And I remember reading it and being I annotate by putting post-it notes because I cannot yet write in books, but in one of the post-it notes, my annotation is literally beautiful storytelling, but who the fuck kills like that as a child? It just was really strange for me. I was like, I know kids do weird things, but who just like kills jellyfish? Like, she would fish them out of the ocean with a bucket and then bring them on land and throw them into I think what she described as like a sand prison, like a dome. And I guess she would just leave them there to die. At least that's what I got from it. And I was so uncomfortable reading it. I was like, this is terrible. I don't know. That's my least favorite one. And it's definitely for personal reasons, not writing etiquette or anything. I just don't like it. Perhaps one of my favorite poems in the collection is called Extended Development. And this is another one that I feel like I love just because of personal reasons. And like I said, poetry is very personal, and I feel like it's hard in a way to review poetry, not only as a poet, but as a person, because poetry is either something that you feel or don't feel. With Extended Development, it's a poem about, mainly I would say her parents, but it has a lot of photography references, specifically references to dark rooms. And I remember when I read this, I have recently written my own poem about how I miss dark rooms, and I wrote that about a month ago. And when I read this, it reminded me not only of that poem that I wrote, but just of that feeling, that nostalgic feeling of the dark room, and of the process of developing your own film and making your own prints. And I have been kind of struggling with photography for the last couple of years and really getting into the groove of it again, and it's been a real struggle. And mostly I do digital photography now. I don't have access to a dark room or anything, and it just filled me with a longing. And so I really enjoy that poem. And there are other really good poems in the book, like love poem number 137, The Oak Tree, Scissors. I thought The Call was pretty good, and there's a lot. I just don't want to sit here and just list out poems, but there's I guess 10 to 12 that I really liked in this collection. But the one I'm going to read is called Corey's Turn. Now, even though I'm going to read Corey's Turn, it's not the poem I used a prompt for the poem that I wrote that I'll read later. I chose Corey's Turn to read instead of the one that I wrote a prompt for and a poem after, is because Corey's Turn is one of the few poems in this collection that really emotionally affected me. And those are the ones that I think really stick with you. And so I'm going to read Corey's Turn now. Corey's Turn. In retrospect, squeezing my knees shut does not seem like the most effective move, and certainly not the bravest, but at the time it was as fast as I could think. I knew that Corey was tall and strong, but that was not the concern at the moment, because he had stayed on his side of the table facing me, watching my face, whereas Mark was the one whose turn it was to be dared. In truth, I think it might have been his idea, or both of them together, laughing as they whispered the word between them, loud enough for anyone in third grade art class to hear, except the teacher who was busy at someone else's watercolor station. So it was Mark who was supposed to kiss me, there, below the table. Mark, whose red hair curled as perfect as a children's rhyme on his freckled forehead. Mark, the shortest boy in class, who would have been teased for it if he wasn't so funny. Mark, who made me laugh in math, whose breath I could feel on my shins. And I don't remember if I wore a skirt or pants, but I do know that Corey watched the entire time, even as I continued to watercolor, pretending that I did not see Mark, on his hands and knees below me. Instead of calling for the teacher, instead of tattletelling, instead of kicking him in the jaw, I held my knees together. And eventually he gave up waiting, kissed my knees instead, and emerged from below the table, claiming that technically he had completed the dare since that was as close as he could get. That surely that should still count. Surely it was now Corey's turn. So, that poem obviously carries some weight to it, and I think that a lot of people, girls, boys, non-binary people, just a lot of people in general, can kind of relate to that feeling of being sexually harassed at a young age, and that fear of not knowing really what to do, and freezing up and just being scared and scarred by the experience. I know that I can, and when I read this poem, it really hit me, and I think out of all the poems in the book, this will be the one that stays with me the most. So, that is Corey's turn. And now, I shall read my poem. Now, the poem that I wrote uses a prompt that I created after a poem in the book called Scissors. Now, Scissors is a very short poem, so I'll just go ahead and read that one too. Scissors. When we moved in together, I noticed. You keep your scissors in the knife drawer. I keep mine with string and tape. We both know how to hide our sharpest parts. I just don't always recognize my own weaponry. So, I felt like this is like one of the most shortest pieces in the book. I felt like it was short, it was effective, and I felt like I understood where she was going with this. The idea that like she has her own weaponry, but she keeps it with things meant for mending, for repairing the damage. And I really liked this piece, and this is one that I wrote a prompt for. The prompt I wrote for this was, what is your weaponry and where do you put it or hide it? Now my poem technically doesn't really answer that question very well, but it is what I wrote, and so I will share it with you. I will be honest, it is a rough draft. I'm still working on it, so by the time that I really share it with the world, it may change, but I will share what I got with you right now. Now, reading my poem, the rough draft of my poem, currently called No Apocalypse. I don't know why, but that's what it's currently called. The silence of sunrise is cracked open, a buckling road, unseen but felt in the quake of eardrums. Panicked birds flee the scene in formations, black clouds, a storm with a mind of its own. We used to be unafraid of noise, of sirens. Can you hear your voice in your head? Does it narrate your life? Mine does. Voice leaks into my bloodstream, trickles down my arm, through my pores, into the pen I'm holding, razor blade ink. I start to write. The horns vibrate to a hush. They grow as quiet as dandelion lips, soft petals, no bite, all hiss. The silence of sunset encloses around us, a force field unseen but felt in the atmosphere. Crop circles cut into my backyard. Home is calling. So that is the poem that I wrote. So I guess the razor blade ink is kind of where I was going with the idea of like, what's my weaponry and where do I hide it? You know, like I thought, you know, I hid it in the pen, and so that's where I was going with that. I'm not sure if I'm done with that piece or not. As I said before, it's kind of a rough draft right now, and I'm going to ask a few people for opinions on it and then see if I want to edit it. But if you're wondering about the last line and the crop circles, during the Zoom call with my poetry book club, or PBBC as we call ourselves, it just so happened that this joke about me being an alien came up, because I kind of gave instructions on how aliens should accurately destroy the world and how it's different from in movies, and then it just kind of escalated from there. So I thought it would be funny to kind of throw in a reference to me being an alien. So yeah, that's where that came from. But I kind of like the weird ending. I kind of enjoy writing poems sometimes that are just kind of unusual and odd and just different. So that's it for today's video. I'm going to give No Matter the Wreckage by Sarah K 3.5 ink block hearts, maybe more like 3 for me personally. I think it's a good read for some people. Some people will like it a lot. It just wasn't for me, but overall it is written well, and she does seem like a good poet and writer. So I just want to put that out there, because I don't really like leaving necessarily anything like negative reviews. Not that this is super negative, but I'm just being honest. It's not my favorite poetry book. It's not my favorite book that we've read, but there were some really good pieces in there, and you might really like it, and it might really speak to you. So I would still check it out and you know, see if it's for you, because you know, just because it's not for me doesn't mean it won't be something that you absolutely love. And yeah, so I would definitely recommend checking it out. I will put links to where you can buy No Matter the Wreckage in the description, as well as links to Sarah K's social media. But that is the video for now. If you liked this video, please do the norm and smash the like button, ring the bell to get notifications, and tippity-tappity in the comments to tell me what you thought. And don't forget to push the subscribe button to see more content by me. If you made it this far, here are your bonus points. Right there, just collect them. Collect them all in, you know? And I will see you in the next video. Wait, am I still recording?